Hey all, Grim here with a new and long overdue installment in my Soulstruct Dark Souls modding tutorial series. I know it's been way too long since the last episode, and this is not the big event scripting episode I was hoping to make next, but just before Elden Ring comes out and most of us vanish mysteriously from society for some indefinite amount of time, I wanted to do a quick tutorial on one aspect of modding Dark Souls 1 that people ask me about quite a bit, and that is modding bonfires, specifically bonfire positions. You know, bonfires do have a fair bit of complicated code underneath them, a bit of event scripting, though not too much, as I'll quickly show you today, as well as some easy state talk scripting, which handles the bonfire menu and a lot of the complex behavioral triggers with prompts and so on. We're not going to look at that really, but what we will look at is how to move bonfires, which is 90% of your modding needs for most of you, I'm sure. For this episode, the only modification I've made to my game is modifying player param 9000. If you have no idea what this window is or what player param 9000 means, I recommend you check out some earlier episodes in this series. And as you may have guessed by now, I'm not a huge fan of the default debug player for Dark Souls 1, and I've changed it to a bit of a lighter setup. We're going to go over 5 steps for modding bonfires in today's episode, but we're not actually going to use filing Shrine, because the filing bonfire does have a little bit of advanced behavior relating to Anastasia, in the way she disappears when Lautrec kills her, and then how she automatically kindles the bonfire later. Instead, we're going to use the Catacombs, which is a map that really has nothing special going on in it, nothing specifically related to bonfires. And of course, this bonfire is not already lit, so we get to explore a little bit more of the behavior as well. The first thing you'll notice here, and this should not be a surprise if you've played Dark Souls 1 before, is that I can't actually light this bonfire. That's because there's an enemy nearby, who I'm going to dispatch handily here. Thank you, debug mode. Now I can light the bonfire, which I'll do. Because I haven't actually technically beaten the Asylum tutorial in this playthrough, I don't even get the option to level up, but that's okay. We get the menu and that's enough to demonstrate what we need to show. Let's say that I'm dying a lot in the first part of the Catacombs, and I want to help myself out by not having to run back this extra few seconds up that ramp. Very ambitious stuff, I know. So we're going to move the bonfire right here. As we did in previous episodes here, we're going to hook into the game in Soulstruct, and that's going to let us use the player's current position and rotation to set the positions of things in our maps tab here. Make sure we go to the Catacombs tab, which is the map we're in. That's map 13.0. Bonfires are actually made up of 3 different ingredients in the map, and forgetting to move just one of those ingredients is probably the main issue that I see a lot of people having. First of all is the object. The object ID for bonfires is 00200, that is object 200, which you can usually find near the top of the list. For some maps you will see object 0110 above this, which is the treasure chest object, but the Catacombs does not actually have any treasure chest. So we have 3 bonfires, and just from Software's numbering here, you can see that they've either removed a second instance of a bonfire at some point, or some kind of renumbering's going on here. And in fact, I suspect if we jump over to unused objects, you can find that unused bonfire here. Now, how do we actually figure out which of these 3 objects is the one that we want to move, the first bonfire in the level? Well, if we go to our debug menu here, which hopefully you're using, just going to drag this down a bit, there we go. We start by going into Game and then Object Inspector, and we can of course find the bonfires right here. Unsurprisingly, it is the first instance of the bonfire object that we want. You can see that there's a white dot next to it, which means it's being drawn right now. That's one giveaway. And if you hover over it, thanks to Horcrux's wizardry in restoring the debug menu for Dark Souls Remastered, you can actually see the bounding box around that object too. We know which bonfire it is we want to move, so let's go stand in game where we want to move it. We've hooked in, so we can just right click the translate property here, and we can copy from hook, and we can copy all 3 of these fields. So we're copying the translate, that's the position in the world. We're going to copy the rotate, and bonfire objects, the rotation doesn't really matter. It doesn't affect how you interact with it. It's more of an aesthetic choice, what way you want that sword to be leaning from the direction that the player approaches. We're also going to set the draw parent, and again, as I've explained in previous episodes, this is the other map part that this part's visibility depends on. Rather than using the very finicky draw group system, we can just rely on this collision, which we jump to, and our object is just going to inherit the draw groups from this parent collision. So let's go ahead and set all those. You can see the collision has changed to 0, that's the one we're standing on now, and we have a rotation set, we have a translate. Let's save and export that, and see what happens in game when we reload. Of course, as with all maps data, you only need to save and quit and reload. You don't need to restart the game application. There it is, our lit bonfire. The bonfire is still lit. Again, it's the exact same object, it's just been moved around. It has the same entity ID, and so the event scripts that control this bonfire are checking the same part of your save data to check whether the bonfire has been lit and kindled and whatever. Now, a bit of a problem here, we can't rest at it. You might be thinking, oh, Well, we have a couple skeletons nearby, and I know I can't rest at bonfires when enemies are nearby, so that must be it, right? But that's not actually the case here, and one giveaway for that is that the bonfire still looks lit. When bonfires are unavailable because of nearby enemies, they go back to their unlit state, which is the little ember at the base of the sword. This one is lit, but we still can't rest there. And in fact, if we go down to where the bonfire used to be, we can still rest right here, though our character will rotate themselves to face the new bonfire position, funnily enough. So clearly there's some part of the game logic that's still using this old location and not the new one. And this is where we come to the second of our 3 components we need to move, which is a character. The bonfire prompt and the menu and the, quote, talking system is actually an invisible character that just happens to be standing right where the bonfire is. And the invisible character model is C1000. You can see there are exactly 3 of them here. C0, don't forget, is the player models. Those are other NPCs in the level, which we're ignoring here. C1000 is an invisible character model. It's used most frequently for bonfires, but you will find it sometimes used by other kind of detached menu systems, such as when you interact with Gwendolyn at his door before you fight him, and as part of his covenant, and a few other spots in the game where you're actually talking to some invisible entity and not a character that can actually be relied upon. The reason we need a character here is that the game doesn't actually support talk scripts for objects. There is no way in the game engine to connect a talking script to an object. Talking scripts, by the way, are over in the talk tab here. This script here controls the bonfire, and there are actually duplicates for them. We can see the talk ID here, 130000, matches the talk ID on character C1000, right here in this field, talk ID. Okay, so that is looking up this talking script. This is in my decompiled format for talk scripts, or easy state scripts as they're known in game. And this is the part of bonfires that I will not be digging into today, but just know that you can come over and look at this if you want to understand a bit more about how bonfires work. For simply moving the bonfire, all we need to do is move this character to the same position as the object. And this is one feature that's unfortunately lacking from Soulstruct right now, the ability to copy an entire transform, so translate and rotate, and even draw parent from one part and copy it to another part. We're just gonna have to copy these values one by one, which isn't too much of a hassle because there's only 3 of them that really matter. We have object X, we'll paste that in there. We have object Y. Note, by the way, that if I'd been smart, I would have set both of these using the hooking system rather than setting one and then copying it to the other. I also need to update the draw parent, or the character may not be drawn when I want them. We're moving the bonfire to such a nearby location that if you forget to change the draw parent, it probably wouldn't matter here because both of these collisions are going to be drawn when you're standing on either of them. So if we save and export that now, and we reload, you'll see that we can now sit where we would expect at our bonfire. So again, just imagine a little invisible character sitting in the bonfire that we are interacting with here to open the bonfire menu. Now you might be wondering the opposite of what you may have wondered a few minutes ago, which is, why am I still able to use this bonfire when there are enemies here? And we'll get to that, but first of all, there is a 3rd component we need to move for our bonfire relocation to be complete, and that is the position of the spawn point. Just to show you why that matters, if I go into the debug menu, character inspector, go to the C0 player, set my own health to 0. Where do you think we're going to respawn? Well, we didn't actually change a spawn point, and it's not automatically determined from the bonfire. It is a separate point in the map's data. And of course, currently it's still over here near the old bonfire. So these are manually set points, and they're associated with the bonfire. Note that FromSoft doesn't always put the spawn point in just a simple sitting position, somewhere where it looks like you could use the bonfire immediately. Sometimes, you might be facing away from the bonfire, ready to run out into the world. Sometimes you might be off to the side a little bit. It does vary a bit, but they do kind of handcraft it. In our case, we're going to assume that the player has opened this gate, and we're going to set it right here. Now, where do we set it? Well, the spawn point itself is an event. There are 4 spawn points here. One of them is called Boss, and this one is not actually used. This is the spawn point connected to that unused bonfire we saw that you can see here in unused objects. And this is a bonfire that would have appeared after you defeated Pinwheel, and we could confirm that just by going and standing at those coordinates. Now, if you're like me, something about what I just told you might be making you feel a little bit uncomfortable, and that's the fact that the ordering of the spawn points here does not match the ordering of the objects. If we ignore the fact that one of the bonfires is disabled, we have objects 0, 1, 2, which is missing, would have been at the boss room, and then 3. And then under the spawn points, they're ordered 0, 1, 2, and then boss. So for these 4 bonfires that were originally going to be in the map, the last 2 have been swapped around here. The ordering of these does not determine how the game connects them to the characters, these C1000s, and the object. It's all about the entity ID. You may have already noticed that the entity IDs of these components all have the same ending. For the bonfire we've been editing, the object starts with 130, as will all entities in this map, because this is map 13.0. The 4th digit is a 1, that's used for objects mostly, and then we have 960. And for the other 2 bonfires, we have 961 and 962. The characters have the same IDs, but the 4th digit is now a 0, which is mostly used for characters. We can see all these other characters like skeletons and necromancers down here that use the same first 4 starting digits. And the spawn point event for this bonfire is 1302960. So we have an object with a 1 in the 4th position, we have a character with a 0 in the 4th position, and we have a spawn point with a 2 in the 4th position. Otherwise, these are identical IDs, and that is critical. That is how the game is linking them together. When an event script registers a bonfire object, and it always refers to the object, the game will automatically look for a character by subtracting 1000 from the ID of the object. That's going to get us this ID in this case, and it's going to add 1000, so bring that 4th digit to 2 to find the spawn point that's connected to that object. And that's critical. Now, the last 3 digits here are not arbitrary. You'll see in every map, the bonfires will start at 960. Occasionally, you will see a 950 used for these, quote, boss bonfires. And a few of these bonfires are still in the game. There are some bosses, particularly in the later game, that do have bonfires that appear in their arenas after you defeat them. So 950 and 960, and then incrementing up from 960 are the IDs you'll normally see. If you do want to add your own bonfires, you are very welcome to. When you duplicate these and you set the new entity IDs, just make sure you keep that matching system of the ID digits all being the same except for that 4th digit. Again, 0 for characters, 1 for objects, 2 for spawn points. Let's get back to moving the spawn point. Now, the spawn point event itself does not have any transform data. There's no translate here that gives it a position in the map. Like all events that use positions in the map, like sounds, which rely on a volume, that's a region that defines where the sound plays, spawn points use point regions, and we can jump to that region by right-clicking and jumping to it. You can see we're up in the regions points category of maps now, and it has the same name as the event. This is Japanese for spawn point 2. And this is where that position is recorded, though of course we don't want spawn point 2, we want spawn point 0. That's the one that was referenced by the event that we are trying to edit. Note that these do not have their own entity IDs because they don't need to be referenced from any event script or anywhere else outside of the map data. Okay, we just have a spawn point directly linking, within the maps tab to this entry. So in our case, we want to edit event 0. Again, we'll right click, we can jump straight to that region, and this is the one we want to set. Now, unlike the object and the character, the rotate does matter here because that's going to be the direction the player is facing when they respawn at this point. We're already standing where we want to respawn, of course, so we can just right click, copy both of those values, and we are done. Our bonfire has been moved. Now, of course, we need to reload the game to see our changes. But you might be thinking, well, when I die, the game kind of reloads anyway, so surely if I die now, and you would be right about that. Okay, you can test that new spawn point immediately by dying in debug mode or to an enemy or anything, and you can see our spawn point there worked beautifully. Now, we still have this one little hitch left of enemies not interrupting the bonfire usage. Okay, we don't really want the player to be able to get away from fights with enemies by quickly resting at a bonfire and having the enemy respawn where they originally were. This doesn't work for all enemies, of course. Some enemies have character params that disable respawning when you rest at a bonfire. The Black Knights that appear in the Undead Asylum when you go back there are a famous example of that. They do not return to their normal starting position when you rest. These skeletons will, however, so if I annoy this guy, and then go and rest, of course, they are going to forget all about me, and in fact, they're going to go back to their disassembled state, because that is how they start when you rest at a bonfire. So how do we fix this? Well, first of all, having respawning enemies near a bonfire is going to be a bad idea, okay? The necromancer down here is okay because he doesn't respawn. You have to kill him to use the bonfire, and he's never coming back after that. The event scripts will keep him dead. Not so for these skeletons up here. But let's pretend that these skeletons are gonna not respawn once you kill them. That's a very simple thing to change in an event script. You just have to make the game remember when this particular enemy dies, and then check that flag and immediately disable the enemy when the map loads if they've already been killed. But assuming we do fix that problem, what do we actually need to change here to make the bonfire recognize that these enemies are nearby? Well, it's actually in the collision data. Every collision in every map has a field called attached bonfire. And you can see that collision 1, which is where the bonfire used to be, currently does have this bonfire ID 960. That's the last 3 digits of the bonfire components we've been editing. This is our bonfire object. By the way, just quickly, you'll notice this play region ID for online play. That happens to be the same as the talk script ID for this bonfire, but that is a coincidence. Don't get confused by that. It is a different thing. You are going to see a lot of numbers in the maps tab here that start with 13.0. The fact that we haven't changed this yet is actually telling us about another problem that's going to happen. Right now, this bonfire will actually not be usable if we have an enemy down here standing on this collision, because this collision, the one we're standing on right now, is still attached to the bonfire. So let's bring this one down here. And then while he's down there, I'll quickly zoom back over, and you can see that the bonfire has now returned to its unlit state, though as soon as the skeleton ran back out of that room, it restored itself. Okay, so the bonfire is still only listening to this collision down here. We want to change it to this collision. This is collision 0 that we're standing on now. And so all we have to do is set this to -1 for the old collision, go up to our new collision, and type in, or copy paste if you want to be extra safe, the entity ID for the object. Again, this is the object, it's not the character, it's not the spawn point. It does have a 1 in the middle of the ID there. Now if we save and export that, and we reload our map, we are going to have a problem resting at this bonfire as long as those skeletons are still alive. And you can see off the bat, this bonfire is now unusable because of those skeletons. And if we use debug exterminate mode to finish off these skeletons, you'll see that the bonfire becomes usable again. Now, one gotcha that you will have to be careful of here is that FromSoft carefully controlled the size of some of their collisions, knowing where bonfires were going to go. So this little room down here has its own collision because we only want the bonfire in this room to listen to a small area of the map. This collision up here might actually be much larger than that. And if we go into the character here and we go to character basic information, if you look at that number that's boxed on the screen, that's the collision we're currently standing on. Now, fortunately for our movement here, this collision is still quite small. It doesn't go back up here. You can see we're on collision 100 now. This is collision 101. And if we go further up here, this is collision 102. Little side note, it's actually quite interesting that collision 0 is not right at the start of the map, way up near Firelink Shrine Cemetery. And that, I think, does reflect the fact that we know the catacombs were moved quite late in development. I'm fairly convinced that they used to be much closer to the Undead Parish, but some other scholars may disagree. If we just clip through the wall here, you can see we're on collision 2 now. This collision number 2 lasts all the way across this bridge. That means if we set our bonfire here and we attached it to collision 2, we would not be able to rest at it even if an enemy was standing all the way over here. So again, the important thing to note is that the bonfire enemy interaction is not based on distance. It is based on collisions. And any collision attached to your bonfire ID must be free of enemies before you can rest at that bonfire. And note that by enemy, I specifically mean a character on an enemy team. It's perfectly fine if allied NPCs are there. I'm not sure about neutral teams. There are quite a lot of different teams that the game does use at certain points, but certainly your regular enemy team and your boss team, if you have a boss that's, escaped its bounds somehow, they will certainly prevent bonfires from working if they're standing on any collision attached to that bonfire. And just to reinforce what I said about that, note that if I rest at this bonfire, I'm going to have a problem immediately. You can see I'm actually not pressing anything, but I'm being booted out of the bonfire because as soon as I rest, enemies respawn on the collision that is connected to the bonfire. So yeah, that's a problem, and you're either going to want to move these enemies or you're going to want to prevent them from respawning. If you want to add more bonfires than currently exist in a map, I'll just quickly show you what else you need to do to make that happen. It's pretty straightforward for most maps. You just want to jump to your event script here. Note, make sure you're on the right map, and you'll usually find the register bonfire instructions right at the top. We're going to copy the last one of those. If you want to try restoring the bonfire in Pinwheel's room, what I will do is show you what you need to change here. So I'm going to copy this register bonfire command. Just going to compile that so I get nice coloring. I'm going to change the first argument by subtracting 8 from it. You'll note that the flags used by the bonfire start at 992 and then go down by 8 each time. Each bonfire uses 8 flags as its memory, and we are setting the first of those flags. So this is going to be 68 here. I'm going to change the object. We want to reference bonfire number 2, which we will of course need to move from unused objects back into normal objects by creating a copy of it. And these other arguments are fine. This determines how far away you have to be, what direction you have to be facing relative to the bonfire, and what the initial kindle level is here. Quick note about the kindle level, it's a bit unintuitive. 0 is, as you'd expect, no kindling. You're only going to get 5 Estus. But if you want to get more Estus, it actually goes up in increments of 10. So setting this to 10 would give you 10 Estus, coincidentally. Setting it to 20 would give you 15 Estus, and setting it to 30 will give you 20 Estus, and that's the max you can reach. Now, of course, if I try to compile this, I'm going to get an error about that object missing, and you can see Soulstruct has highlighted the problematic line here, but I'm presuming that you've added that back in, and then this will compile just fine. And as long as you've set up your 4 map components correctly, that being the object, the character, the spawn point event, and the point that the spawn point event uses, then it should work fine on your end. But that is left as an exercise for the viewer. I hope this tutorial was helpful, even if you're not interested in moving bonfires yourself. Maybe you learned a little bit. I'm sorry again that there haven't been more tutorials lately. The Nightfall demo, which we released in January, was definitely keeping us very busy, and the whole Nightfall project, of course, really took off over the last year, really. I'm going to take a bit of a break during Elden Ring, like a lot of you will, I'm sure, and be back afterward with more updates on Nightfall, more tutorials, I'm hoping, and, well, who knows what else the future may hold. Thank you all for watching. A huge thanks to those who support me on Patreon. Thank you also to anyone who played the Nightfall demo, and I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you for the kind words, and we're integrating all of your feedback into the final release later this year. Stay human, and I will see you all on the other side of Elden Ring.